A 73-year-old retired engineer opens his Medicare statement and finds a charge of $15,500 for catheters he never ordered, never received, never even heard of. He was one of more than 1 million Americans whose identities were stolen to fuel what the Department of Justice now calls the largest healthcare fraud case in American history, Operation Gold Rush. It involved $10.6 billion in fake Medicare claims built on stolen names, shell companies, and medical supplies that never existed. But how did a criminal network operating from halfway around the world bill Medicare for 1 million people and nearly get away with it? The engineer sat at his kitchen table, glasses perched low, scanning his Medicare summary notice. There, among the usual columns, a line item jumped out. $15,500 billed for urinary catheters. He had never even heard of the company listed as the supplier. No doctor had mentioned catheters. He had never needed one, never ordered one, never received a single box. For a moment, he wondered if it was a clerical error. But the charge was real, and the statement warned him he could be responsible for the full amount if Medicare refused to pay. He picked up the phone and dialed the Medicare hotline. The agent confirmed the claim had been submitted under his name, with his Medicare number, using a physician's credentials he did not recognize. The agent explained this was not an isolated incident. Medicare had begun seeing a wave of suspicious high-dollar claims for medical supplies, mostly catheters, billed to thousands of unsuspecting seniors across the country. For the engineer, the shock was not just financial. He had spent decades designing systems to keep data safe, only to become a target in retirement. He worried about his credit, his savings, and what else the thieves might do with his information. He filed a fraud complaint, froze his credit, and waited for answers. Eventually, the claim was reversed. But the sense of violation lingered. The Medicare summary. Notice is supposed to be a routine document, a record of what Medicare paid and what the beneficiary might owe. Most people glance at it, then toss it in a drawer. But for more than 1 million Americans, it became the first sign that something was very wrong. When the Department of Justice made its announcement in June 2025, the numbers dwarfed anything seen before. $14.6 billion in fraudulent claims spread across 50 federal districts, 324 people charged, including 96 licensed medical professionals, doctors, nurse practitioners, and pharmacists. The scheme had stolen the identities of over 1 million Americans and more than 7,000 doctors. The conspirators bought up more than 30 legitimate U.S. medical supply companies to make their operation look real. They coordinated from overseas using encrypted apps and sent a flood of fake Medicare claims for catheters that were never ordered and never delivered. The money moved fast. Proceeds were routed through cryptocurrency exchanges, then hidden in offshore shell companies. $4.45 billion in scheduled Medicare payments were blocked before they could be sent out, but roughly $41 million still slipped through. Federal agents seized more than $245 million in cash, luxury cars, and real estate, including a Dubai golf estate bought with laundered funds. And behind these headlines, the cost to taxpayers kept rising. The Government Accountability Office estimates that Medicare fraud drains $60 to $100 billion from the system every year. For anyone on Medicare, the lesson is clear. Check your Medicare summary, notice line by line. If you see a charge you do not recognize, call 1-800-MEDICARE. Stopping fraud starts with paying attention. If you found this story important, subscribe for more in-depth investigations. On June 30th, 2025, the Department of Justice stepped in front of the cameras and delivered numbers that stunned even seasoned prosecutors. The press release called it Operation Gold Rush. At its center, $14.6 billion in fraudulent Medicare claims, a figure that more than doubled the previous national record. The sweep reached across 50 federal judicial districts, touching nearly every corner of the country. Charges were filed against 324 defendants, among them 96 licensed medical professionals, including doctors, nurse practitioners, and pharmacists. The Department of Justice's language was direct. This was not a single rogue clinic or a handful of bad actors. According to officials, the scheme had stolen the identities of over 1 million Americans, including more than 7,000 doctors. The network had acquired over 30 legitimate U.S. medical supply companies to give the operation a veneer of credibility. From there, the conspirators coordinated using encrypted messaging apps, sending a flood of fake claims for urinary catheters, devices that were never ordered, never delivered, and never needed. The money flowed almost as quickly as the claims. Once Medicare processed the paperwork, proceeds were routed through cryptocurrency exchanges and hidden behind layers of offshore shell companies. The Department of Justice credited a new generation of data analytics and real-time payment blocking with stopping $4.45 billion in scheduled Medicare payments before the funds could leave federal accounts. Even so, about $41 million still slipped through and landed in the conspirators' hands before the freeze took effect. Federal agents moved fast to seize assets. More than $245 million in cash, luxury vehicles, and real estate were recovered. Among the highlights was a $2.9 million golf estate in Dubai, purchased through a shell company and traced back to the fraud's proceeds. The operation's reach underscored a central reality. Medicare fraud is not a rare event. The Government Accountability Office estimates that fraud, waste, and abuse drain between $60 billion and $100 billion from Medicare every year. For the Department of Justice, the message was clear: no one is immune, and the cost is borne by every taxpayer and every Medicare beneficiary. The numbers from Operation Gold Rush forced a new kind of reckoning. But how did they actually pull this off? More than 1 million Americans never realized their names, birth dates, and Medicare numbers had been swept up in a data breach. The files did not just vanish into the digital ether. They were packaged, sold, and weaponized. Across dark web forums, patient records and doctor credentials traded hands for a few dollars each. Some of the stolen information came from a 2022 ransomware attack on a regional health information exchange, exposing entire rosters of Medicare beneficiaries. Other records were gathered through phishing emails sent to clinic staff, luring them into revealing national provider identifier numbers and billing passwords. In total, over 1 million patient profiles and at least 7,000 provider ID numbers were funneled into CSV files, ready-made templates for fraud. Armed with this data, the architects of the scheme set up a network of more than 30 US-based medical supply companies. These were not paper fronts, they were real businesses purchased outright or quietly taken over, with legitimate addresses, working phone lines, and the necessary licenses to bill Medicare. The conspirators concealed their true ownership through layers of shell companies, forging financial statements and omitting any mention of prior fraud investigations. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission received alerts about these unusual ownership structures, but the acquisitions went through without intervention. From there, the pipeline ran with assembly line precision. Stolen patient and doctor information was fed into automated claim generation scripts, producing thousands of fake requests for urinary catheters each month. Each claim looked legitimate on the surface, complete with valid HCPCS codes like J3490 and A4550, and the NPI of a real, unsuspecting physician. Claims ranged from $700 to $1,200 per catheter, and at the scheme's peak, about 150,000 false claims were submitted every month. Most of these claims were filed through CMS electronic claims processing system, using the same channels as any legitimate medical supplier. The supply companies acted as laundering points, giving the operation a veneer of normalcy. They maintained websites, answered calls, and even ordered some inventory to avoid suspicion. But the catheters billed to Medicare were never ordered by patients or prescribed by doctors. In many cases, the supposed recipients had no idea what a catheter was until the charge appeared on their Medicare summary notice. Coordination took place through encrypted messaging apps, Signal, Telegram, and others, linking data harvesters in Estonia, shell company managers in the US, and payment handlers in Russia and Kazakhstan. The fraudsters submitted claims in bulk, timing their uploads to avoid detection by spreading them across dozens of companies and hundreds of provider ID numbers. The sheer volume overwhelmed the system, making it nearly impossible for any one patient, doctor, or supplier to spot the pattern on their own. By exploiting the gaps between data security, provider verification, and claims processing, the network turned stolen identities into a torrent of fraudulent bills. Each step in the pipeline was designed to mimic legitimate business, hiding the fraud in plain sight, and setting the stage for the next phase, when investigators would finally start to notice that something was deeply wrong. Inside the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, a wall of monitors tracks billions of dollars in claims every day. Buried in that data, a spike in catheter billing set off alarms. The CMS Analytics Director, Mehmet Oz, watched as the dashboard lit up with alerts. Claims for urinary catheters pouring in from rural zip codes, hitting the 99th percentile of historical volume. Patterns like these do not happen by accident. The risk score shot up overnight flagging a network of providers whose billing suddenly dwarfed even the busiest hospitals. The CMS machine learning models had been trained for moments like this. The system does not just look for outliers, it compares every claim to years of prior data, searching for sudden jumps, geographic clusters, or providers who never ordered these supplies before. In June 2025, the software's alert triggered an immediate escalation to the Fraud Detection Unit. Within hours, a joint memo from CMS and the Department of Justice authorized a real-time payment block on every claim tied to the suspicious companies. This was not a routine audit. The CMS prepayment strategy meant that scheduled payments could be frozen before a single dollar left the Treasury. On the morning of the freeze, $4.45 billion in Medicare funds were queued for payout to the companies under investigation. The system sent out automated payment suspension notices halting the entire stream. Each provider was given a 48-hour window to contest the freeze, but the evidence was overwhelming: patient records that did not match, doctors who denied ever writing the prescriptions, and supply invoices for goods that never shipped. While the freeze held back nearly all the money, $41 million had already slipped through in the days before the block. Still, the scale of what was prevented dwarfed the losses. The analytics did not just catch the fraud, they stopped it cold, shutting down the main artery before the funds could vanish into cryptocurrency wallets and offshore accounts. For CMS, this was a turning point. Years of investing in predictive analytics and risk scoring had paid off, transforming the agency from a passive payer to an active defender of public funds. The director later called it the moment the system fought back. The real-time payment block did not just save billions, it forced the criminal network into the open. With the money cut off, the conspirators scrambled, leaving digital footprints that investigators would soon follow. The next moves belonged to federal law enforcement, but the story of how the fraud was contained started with a dashboard, a risk alert, and a decision to freeze the flow before it was too late. Federal agents moved in with precision, striking at airports, border crossings, and apartments thousands of miles apart. At Los Angeles International Airport, Ivan Petrov, a 38-year-old Russian national, was pulled aside just before boarding. In his carry-on, 2 encrypted phones, a laptop loaded with claim generation scripts, $120,000 in cash, and a hardware wallet holding nearly $1 million in cryptocurrency were discovered. The FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force had tracked his movements for weeks, using intercepted telegram messages to pinpoint his arrival. At the San Diego to Tijuana border, customs officers stopped Alexei Muratov, a Kazakh businessman, as he tried to cross in a late-model SUV. Inside the vehicle were $80,000 in bundled bills, 3 luxury watches, and a briefcase stuffed with crypto vouchers worth $250,000. Immigration and Customs Enforcement flagged his vehicle based on asset forfeiture intelligence shared just hours earlier. Half a world away in Tallinn, Estonian police and U.S. Marshals burst into a high-rise apartment. Christian Kask and Lena Tam, both in their 30s, were taken into custody. Their computers held over 1 million stolen patient records and logs of encrypted chats, detailing bulk claims and wire transfers. A handwritten ledger tied them to the purchase of a $2.9 million golf villa in Dubai. Paid for with laundered Medicare funds, the sweep did not stop there. Over $245 million in assets, including cash, high-end cars, cryptocurrency, and real estate, were frozen or seized under federal forfeiture orders. The Dubai estate, bought through a shell company, was locked down by authorities in the United Arab Emirates. Each arrest and asset freeze sent a message: the proceeds of Medicare fraud cannot hide behind borders or encrypted accounts. Every year, Medicare fraud drains between $60 billion and $100 billion from the system. Costs that ripple out to every taxpayer and every person who relies on these benefits. The scale of Operation Gold Rush shows how even a single missed line on a statement can open the door to massive theft. But there are clear practical steps anyone can take to protect themselves. Start by reviewing your Medicare summary notice every time it arrives. Do not just glance at the total. Look line by line for any service, supply, or provider you do not recognize. Catheters, braces, or other medical equipment you never ordered are red flags. If something looks off, do not wait. Call 1-800-MEDICARE right away, or log into mymedicare.gov to report the charge. The sooner you act, the easier it is to stop fraudulent claims before they cost you money or damage your credit. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has set up dedicated teams to help beneficiaries spot and report suspicious activity. Their guidance is simple: verify the details, question unfamiliar items, and never share your Medicare number unless you are certain you are dealing with a trusted provider. If you think your information has been stolen, freeze your credit and file a report with the Federal Trade Commission. Every report helps build the case against fraudsters and protects future victims. The retired engineer's story began with a single line on a statement, but it ended with action. That is the power every Medicare recipient holds. Being vigilant does not just protect your own account, it helps safeguard the entire system. Medicare fraud isn't abstract, it targets real people, siphoning billions meant for care. With $60 to $100 billion lost annually, the next false charge could appear on your statement. If you are on Medicare, check every line of your summary notice and report anything suspicious to 1-800-MEDICARE. Vigilance isn't optional, it's the last defense. Subscribe for more stories that protect your future.